And hello again. And welcome to the people online. Just recognizing today, as I tried to have a Dharma talk that's prepared but not over prepared, and then events in the world happen, and I'm not sure where they fit in, but I want to acknowledge that local and global. We've got another weekend bombing campaign, and then I heard the name of our Wilderness Dharma partner, Luba, on the memorial service, which is new to me, and we'll just feel into that and really take the opportunity to ask or to look at the big questions of why we are here. What are we doing here? First, there's the big three. Suffering, old age, and death is the big question, and that is the focus of Buddhism and Zen. And the other one is compassion, and so everything we practice is really a focus on those. So we'll jump in and see where that lands. I worked on the President's Day holiday. It was scheduled to be a holiday, but I worked. And at the hospital, it's a skeleton crew there that day, and some minor issues came up, and so I was looking around at who was available to direct around to address them, and I looked at the calendar, and it showed that everybody was here today, which I knew wasn't true and was frustrating. In fact, I was a bit angry at the person who was supposed to be doing the scheduling, because now I don't know who to talk to. And then the thoughts arise of, well, gee, it just doesn't understand the seriousness of us having this information about who to call, and maybe a little bit lazy, and then come to find out that, well, actually the names had all been updated on the schedule, but it was a new version of the schedule because toward the last minute I had asked for a new version of the schedule to be created. And there probably would have been time to get it out on the Friday, except that I asked him to take on a couple of other projects. So looking at these assumed intentions, we'll carry that into the topic of today. We've been studying the paramitas, and Raisala has already done a talk on Dana Paramita, but as Chris said last week, it's our favorite one. So I want to look at really a very specific element of generosity. I had an insight into this element of generosity with a philosophy paper that I wrote in college that I thought I had done a really excellent job, a strong argument of just totally skewering the author of the paper that I was reviewing. And the professor came back and said, well, everything you said was correct, but you weren't taking the generous interpretation of what he was saying. That in debate, maybe, or in law, you go for whatever you can. But the intention here is that we try to understand their argument as well as we could possibly have made it if we were trying to make that argument. So what I want to look at today is generosity in our interpretations of others' actions, generosity in our assumptions about intentions. This goes beyond forgiveness, and forgiveness is highly recommended. Forgiveness is challenging. Forgiveness has a lot of resources in Zen. It's something that we talk about, that it comes up through the years of our study. It encourages us to seek out our blind spots and our confusions and recognize that everyone is acting out of blind spots and confusion. But I want to go beyond forgiveness to actually recognizing that we don't know everything, right? I mean, that's kind of another core Zen principle, is questioning what it is that we think we know, and especially when it comes to other people. Chris also mentioned the Dale Wright book on the Paramitas, is the old standby book. So when I was thinking about doing this talk, I got out my old Dale Wright book on the Paramitas. And ironically, I was surprised to find just how much lack of generosity I had toward Dale Wright in reading him, because the book was just peppered with these comments on what he wrote. Like, oh, this isn't right, and he doesn't understand the Dharma. And oh, that was probably 15 years ago that I was reading that. But
does he understand a little bit more?
yes, he understands a little more now, right? Yeah. We take that from our perspective of approaching the whole of life as both an in the moment, what am I experiencing, and a recognition that the separation is a delusion. In our meal chant, we talk about the three wheels: giver, receiver, and gift. And maybe when we're looking at interpreting what the actions and the statements of others are, we could form a similar, there's the giver, receiver, and gift, there's the me, the you, and the what we're talking about. And when it comes to others, there's no separation between myself and the person who I believe is wrong, and whatever it is that I think they're wrong about. And we wrap in generosity to that, this effort to reach out with doing a little bit more, reach out with a little energy to explore that. As mentioned plenty, Hama a few times mentioned that we are this is a practice of lists. We have all the lists. So the 4 unlimited emotions are loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity. And this also doesn't quite fit in there, or maybe this is a specific application of that. There's something missing, which is this, maybe we'll call it an intellectual empathy. Right? The empathy is being able to feel from the perspective of the other person, and a piece of that is being able to think from the perspective of the other person. Of course, we have to start with generosity focused inward. As I think about how we often mess that up with feeling guilt in a non-productive way that's just pain, that is basically just violence to ourselves. So all of the studying that we're doing is within that context of what makes the world a better place, and is not just violence to ourselves. Maybe another step besides forgiveness on the path to trying to look at the intentions of others is the Buddhist practice of imagining that everything that anybody else in the world does is because they're a Buddha and they are doing it for your benefit. This is a practice I learned about from Jack Kornfield in his book Path with Heart, which is just a carrying on of ancient teachings. Boy, imagine that, all right? Every time you get cut off in traffic, any time somebody says a rumor about you, it's for your benefit. That's a wonderful practice to put us in the mindset. And that's also not quite what I'm talking about, because that we do that practice purely to focus on the benefit of it and not really believing that they're doing it because they're a Buddha for my benefit. So we keep studying. So a quote from Nancy Mujo Baker said, notice the moralistic connotation of these words. These words being that somebody else is wrong, that somebody else is at fault. An assumption that things or people should be other than what they are. Notice the should here. When we find fault, not only do we have a preference, but we are ready to reject something, to exclude it from our world, and definitely from ourselves. Often what we think of as faults may not be at all, especially when whatever it is not harming others, and is just something I reject in myself. Thank God I don't have her elbows. Although I think a lot of times we have perceptions about what is harming others or is harming me. And all of it feeds our mistaken notions of separateness. I think the paramitas, the precepts, appreciated Hana's job of tying the perfections back to the precepts, back to our ethical work. And looking at how that is founded on that fundamental flaw in our perception that there is separateness. We're having a 2-for-1 special today. So I also want to talk about another paramita, just so we don't have too much generosity. And I didn't want us to go through this whole series of talks without hitting dhyana, perfection of concentration, or meditation. Meditation is the better translation. Dhyana was, I'm not sure, I didn't verify whether that's a Sanskrit or Pali word, probably Sanskrit. But through hundreds of years of teaching, that word dhyana became Chan, Chinese Chan, which then became, in Japan, Zen. So the very name of this practice is that perfection of meditation. And that word, sometimes as we read the paramitas, is translated as the perfection of concentration, but it in the original teachings, it didn't mean that. It was they very clearly chose the word that was the practice of meditation, the practice of sitting down with intention to do nothing. Well, sitting down with intention to do whatever it is that we do in meditation, and not on the benefits that arise from it, or concentrate. Those other words. And yet, ironically, our practice, which took that as the name, flipped it on its head and brought it back to mean the practice of all of it, with Dogen's teaching that everything is meditation. So it's, for us, the perfection of bringing all of our lives, everything we do, to be this effort that we're practicing in meditation. So, meditation, going back, let's, just start. I was caught today in our grass roof hermitage as we chanted that on the Just Return. So that got me thinking about returning, and that's our meditation. So we start with our good posture when we sit in meditation, right? We ought to cover a few of those points in meditation because that's what that perfection is. We sit with our, if we're on our cushion, and we could be it on the chair or whatever, but we sit with our hips rolled forward a little bit, maybe definitely our back straight, unless we have some, all of our bodies are different. Most of us are able to maintain the straight back, and that's highly encouraged if we can make that part of our meditation, so that as though we are suspended from the top of our head. And as we're putting all this effort into that posture, we can't let go of the effort of letting it go, of relaxing, of letting the shoulders fall down, of not holding the tension in our hips, of really finding that balance point so that we don't have to put a bunch of extra muscle work into it. So starting with that point of posture, we bring our mind to whatever it is that we have chosen as our focus. Oftentimes our breath, bring our mind to our breath. Bring our mind to our next breath. And then we realize that we're not bringing our mind to our breath, that we're somewhere else. So then we return. That's step 4, right? Is always that returning, that coming back to it. And that doesn't just apply on the cushion. That applies to our steps every day. Norman Fisher in The World Could Be Otherwise points that out. Zen's approach to meditation is set. Everything is meditation, or nothing is but meditation. The meditation is beyond meditation, so there's no need to meditate. Insight is sudden, constant, all-pervasive, and therefore unnecessary. How do we come to this profoundly liberative understanding? By practicing meditation so that we can understand how useless it is. Isn't that typical Norman? And by continuing to practice meditation, not because it is necessary or even helpful, but because we are bodhisattvas who are dedicated to sharing practice with others. It transcends life and death, purity and impurity. And then the little piece from Norman that just captures it so much for me. The irony of what we're trying to do. Meditation is a process of returning to our true selves that know that we are nothing other than everything we are not. Our true selves that know that we are nothing other than everything we are not. That separation. Doesn't exist. And of course it does. We have to get the fork to our mouth. We have to deal with getting up every day and going to work. But we also need to see that lack of separation. I appreciate it again in Chris's talk last week, and I don't have the exact words, but something like serenity doesn't mean that it all stops whirling. That the world continues whirling around us, and then of course it's not like we are sitting as the calm with everything going around us. We are part of the whirling too, but when we get to our true selves, that is the calm in the middle. So back a bit to looking at others' intentions with generosity, and with a particularly challenging for many of us time for that is when we are looking at what's going on in politics. Do we so readily reach the conclusion that half of the population of America is purely selfish, unethical, or suckers. We get into this habit often, from my experience of talking with people and listening to people, of very quickly villainizing. So let's come back to looking at our relationship on the precept of not expounding on the faults of others. A practice recommended by Kathleen Shokai, Bishop. Begin by deciding how you will completely relinquish yourself to the life of the Bodhisattva in thoughts, words, and actions. Step 1. Step 2, set your intention to be mindful of words of harm to self or others. Step 3, accept the Buddha's boundless loving kindness in each situation. And step 4, finally, this is for the practice of the precept, to journal, but to explicitly note how we are learning to embody the truth, that truth of non-separation and all of its aspects, thoughts, words, and actions that are affecting our life. And good luck with that. In the study of the precepts, Rich and I are studying the Opening to Oneness book by Nancy Mujo Baker as part of our preparation for marriage in a few months, which is delightful. And I can't imagine a better study for marriage than to be looking at our ethical stance together and really looking at our own faults together. I especially appreciate in that book, in the Opening to Oneness, the new to me interpretation of the absolute. We've long time talked about the precepts as being seen from a literal understanding, like we just follow it because it says that, a relative understanding, recognizing that sometimes just following the words doesn't quite do the job, and then the absolute understanding being the standpoint of non-separateness. And what Nancy Mujo Baker adds to that discussion is an emphasis on that the precepts arise naturally as we have encounters with clairseeing. That it's not about don't, just following a rule, that it's about what arises naturally as we recognize our union, our unity with others. The book Opening to Oneness is Becoming One, and that's particularly relevant in that getting married, right? We're becoming one, so there's a little bit more to that oneness. And so the last note of that, I hope that everybody here will be able to join us in celebrating that marriage with a potluck after our sit on June 7th. So please come on June 7th and join us. That's Sunday here. Let's do some exercises. So, actually, I guess we could maybe, I don't know, do we keep the recording going while I walk us through? Maybe we can keep the recording going until we get to the point of discussion. So, if the people, like, I'm just trying to quickly get the room rearranged. So let's say if the people on that wall, oh, that wouldn't work either. All right, pair up quickly, please, but not with the person who's right next to you. So if you moved your cushion for bowing, please get up and find a person further away from you.
So shall I pause the recording?
No, I think this won't take very long. We'll be continuing the discussion. Oh, yeah, go ahead and pause. That's fine. Two. We could stop it. We could stop the recording. There's no more.